This is one of the most popular videos we've ever done, with over 750,000 views. And it's no surprise why. People want to know how these new meds that make you lose a bunch of weight just by injecting once a week actually work. In this video, we're going to do a deep dive on exactly how they work. We'll talk about some of the recent studies on the specific mechanisms behind weight loss, and we will also discuss what you can expect from treatment, including both the good and bad things to expect. We'll also have links in the show notes to our other videos where we've interviewed an expert on the topic and also did a video on the pros and cons of these medications. So, the fact that this medication causes weight loss in people who are not perfect with their diet and exercise is really remarkable. Not to mention that there is nothing else on the market that even comes close to these kinds of results, including more rare but serious side effects. Studies show that people who have lost weight on semaglutide tend to come from a larger body size to begin with. In fact, it may even lead to muscle loss in some cases. For example, in a study of 204 adults with obesity, semaglutide led to an average weight loss of 14.9 kilograms over 68 weeks. Of this weight loss, about 8.6 kilograms was fat-free mass, which includes muscle. This suggests that the weight loss from semaglutide isn't entirely coming from fat loss. Semaglutide has been shown to stimulate the release of gut hormones like GLP-1, peptide Y, and serotonin. Peptide Y, and serotonin are thought to play a role in suppressing appetite. One theory for how this works is that GLP-1 and peptide Y travel from the intestines to the brain and bind to the same Y336 receptors that CGM binds to, leading to reduced appetite. Instead, it seems to come from a reduction in overall body mass, which includes fat and muscle. Semaglutide is just the beginning. There are a bunch of other drugs in development that promise to make weight loss even easier. I'm a co-founder of a Center for Metabolic Health, and I'm an obesity medicine physician. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Stay tuned for our upcoming videos where we'll cover those drugs in detail. CGM has a high affinity for the Y336 receptor in the brain, which means it binds to it very strongly. CGM is thought to lead to reduced calorie intake by increasing fullness during meals. A few different theories exist for how this happens. One theory is that semaglutide causes the stomach to expand more in response to food, leading to earlier fullness. Another theory is that CGM causes the intestines to absorb fluids, leading to expansion and earlier fullness. Binding to this receptor is thought to reduce appetite and increase satiety. For example, the average person in the semaglutide trials weighed 210 pounds. In other words, they can all work together to cause weight loss. So which of these mechanisms is the most important for causing weight loss? It's not entirely clear. Some research suggests that binding to the Y336 receptor in the brain is the most important mechanism, whereas other research suggests that reduced caloric intake is the most important mechanism. Ultimately, more research is needed to say for sure. So if you're eating less and your body has less energy to burn, it will start breaking down muscle for energy as well. A lot of research suggests that semaglutide reduces the reward value of food. For example, one study showed that participants who took semaglutide had reduced brain activity in the ventral striatum in response to food cues. The ventral striatum is an important region for reward processing. In other words, the parts of your brain that light up when you see a delicious piece of food. Another study showed that semaglutide reduced the pleasantness of food and the desire to eat. So if food doesn't taste as good and you don't want it as badly, you'll naturally eat less of it. Another reason is that semaglutide leads to fewer calories consumed. And unfortunately, it seems to reduce lean tissue more proportionally than fat. There are 5 main mechanisms that are currently believed to be responsible. 1. Delaying gastric emptying. Gastric emptying is the process by which food leaves your stomach and enters your intestines. The rate of gastric emptying affects how quickly you feel full after a meal. If gastric emptying is slow, you stay full longer. If gastric emptying is fast, you tend to get hungry sooner. Some research suggests that CGM slows down gastric emptying by binding to the Y336 receptor in the brain. When this happens, your body releases a hormone called cholecystokinin, which slows down gastric emptying. For example, in one study, semaglutide led to an average reduction of 160 calories per day, but reduced lean tissue 1.5 times more than fat. The thin person will likely have much less body fat left over at the end, because they had less to begin with. First, expect to pay around $1,300 a month out of pocket unless your insurance covers it. Second, expect to receive the medication by injection. Third, expect to see gradual weight loss over time. You won't lose a bunch of weight overnight. Fourth, expect to have to combine it with lifestyle modifications such as diet and exercise for optimal results. Finally, be aware of potential side effects. Nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea are common side effects that usually go away as you continue taking the drug. But pancreatitis and kidney failure are rare but serious side effects to be aware of. It's sort of like comparing a big glass that's completely full of water to a small glass that's half full of water. If you remove 1/4 of the water from the big glass, it still has 3/4 of water remaining. But if you remove 1/4 of the water from the small glass, it ends up being completely empty. On average, people lost 10 more weight than expected based on their BMI. This makes sense because the bigger someone is to begin with, the more surface area their body has for fat storage. Also, the bigger someone is to begin with, the more metabolically unhealthy they are, and thus the easier it is for them to lose weight. So make sure you check those out as well. As a result, losing weight for smaller people is harder to begin with, regardless of whether or not they take a medication like semaglutide. One study found that thin people only lost about 2% of their weight on semaglutide, whereas overweight people lost 8%. However, the absolute amount of weight lost was similar between the two groups. For example, people in the normal weight group who started at 170 pounds lost an average of 3.4 pounds after 36 weeks of semaglutide treatment. On the other hand, people in the overweight group who started at 260 pounds lost an average of 4 pounds after 36 weeks. But first, the basics. What are these medications? They are synthetic versions of a naturally occurring gut hormone called glucagon-like peptide 1, or GLP-1. There are multiple medications in this class, and the way they work to control blood sugar is by binding to and activating the GLP-1 receptors in the pancreas, which stimulates the release of insulin when blood sugar is high and suppresses the release of glucagon, which would normally raise blood sugar. But researchers quickly realized that these medications were causing weight loss as a side effect. So now they're also being used off-label for weight loss alone. The one that's probably gotten the most attention so far is semaglutide, under the brand name Wegovy. The 0.75 milligrams dose led to an average weight loss of 3% over 68 weeks, whereas the lower 0.15 milligrams dose only resulted in 1.2% weight loss. Because of this, the higher dose was subsequently tested in the form of Wegovy, which ultimately led to an average weight loss of around 15% over 68 weeks. That might not sound like much, but remember, that's over half a year. So that's around 3 pounds per month, which is pretty impressive. It's given by injection once a week, and it comes in different doses, ranging from 0.25 milligrams to 2 milligrams. Other medications in the same class include liraglutide, albiglutide, and setmelanotide. We'll mostly be focusing on semaglutide in this video, since it's the most studied and has been on the market the longest. How do they work? Originally, these medications were developed as treatments for type 2 diabetes. Semaglutide was initially tested at doses of 0.15 milligrams and 0.75 milligrams for weight loss. In addition, people don't necessarily stick to their diets and exercise plans perfectly all the time. The next question you might have is if it's effective for everyone. Unfortunately, no. On the other hand, smaller people tend to start out with less excess fat and also tend to be more metabolically healthy. So although a thin person and an overweight person may lose the same amount of weight on semaglutide, another important thing to consider is that while semaglutide does lead to weight loss, it doesn't necessarily lead to fat loss. Why does this happen? Well, part of the reason is that your body uses muscle to help convert food into energy. Okay, so you're thinking about getting on semaglutide. What can you expect? So now, let's get into the science of exactly how semaglutide causes weight loss. No. 2. Stimulating the release of gut hormones. No. 3. Binding to the Y336 receptor in the brain. No. 4. Reducing calorie intake due to fullness. Finally, no. 5. Reducing the reward value of food. Now, it's important to note that these mechanisms are not mutually exclusive. One thing is clear though, thanks to these new drugs, weight loss is about to get a whole lot easier. I'm a co-founder of a Center for Metabolic Health, and I'm an obesity medicine physician.